Welcome to Bleed Purple, a 10-part podcast about the 125-year history of Tarleton State University. Host Drew Myers will cover Tarleton's rich traditions, speak with notable alumni, and uncover the stories that give Tarleton its lasting legacy. Here's your host, Drew Myers.
Welcome to the Bleed Purple podcast, which tells the story of Tarleton State University through the stories of the people who bleed purple. On every episode, we're sitting down with individuals who have a heart for this university. Thank you guys for listening. I'm your host, Drew Myers. This is part 2 of my sit-down conversation with Dr. Bud Frazier, who essentially grew up on the campus of Tarleton State University, attended school here when it was a 2-year college, and then went on to do remarkable things in cardiovascular medicine. It's not a stretch to say world-changing things in cardiovascular medicine. On episode 1 of this 2-part podcast, we talked about Dr. Frazier's heart for Tarleton, and we shared some lighthearted stories about growing up in Stephenville, Texas. He also talked about his dad and the recent recognition he received from the university. On this episode, part 2, we're going to dive into Dr. Frazier's remarkable feats in cardiovascular medicine. Again, world-altering accomplishments. Now, I want to jump right into our conversation, and my initial question for Dr. Frazier revolved around the thing he was most proud of over the course of his career. That led to a back-and-forth discussion about his professional journey.
Well, it's a little hard to say. I don't know. I went to Baylor in Houston mainly because my girlfriend at the time was living in Houston. That became my wife. That was about the only interest I had at Baylor. But the nice thing at Baylor was they only had like 75 students a class, and each student had to do a research project. And Baylor Medical School was really built by Dr. DeBakey. Baylor Medical School lost its accreditation in Dallas. They didn't have enough basic science educational programs. They were given $1 million by Mr. Cullen, who was a big philanthropist from Houston, to move to Houston, which they did, but it was still on probation when Dr. DeBakey came in 1949. And by the time I went there, 1963, it was the best medical school in the South, basically, Baylor and Duke. But all that was Dr. DeBakey, who was ferocious to work with. He fired people right and left. When I started as a surgery resident there were 20 of us, and 4 of us finished.
Wow.
Fired the rest. Baylor could finish 6 residents, and the year ahead of me, there were 7 still left, so they could only finish 6. So we knew he'd fire 1. He fired 5 of them, so there were only 2 chiefs at that time. At any rate, he was a remarkable guy, and I think he made Baylor, and he gave me a lot of drive to achieve whatever I've achieved. And one of the things, as I said, was the research. And I was a history English major. I didn't major in science. And in those days, you didn't have to major in a science to go to medical school. In fact, it was discouraged. So we had to have a research project by November the 1st. We started day after Labor Day, like all schools did in that day. But we had to do research every year, and research project had to be declared by November the 1st. Well, it was October the 30th, and I had no idea what research I was going to do because I had very little interest in science. I found it rather boring. But I had a classmate who was also a fraternity brother of mine at Texas, and he came up to me, and I remember I was waiting at the elevator for the elevator, and he came up and he said, Bud, what are you going to do for your research project? It was October the 30th, and I said, well, I've got another day I hadn't thought about it. And he said, I knew you wouldn't have done anything. I'm going to work on the artificial heart with Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Leota, but I couldn't do it by myself, so I'd already put your name down. so you don't have to do anything, because I knew you wouldn't have done anything anyway, and just show up next Tuesday in the lab. And that's how artificial heart got started. And I stayed in it. My friend had a bit of a tremor he thought would impair him in surgery. Probably wouldn't have, but he did have a little tremor. So he went into medicine, and I just stayed with the artificial heart project, because that was the first artificial heart that was made. It was Domingo Leota and Dr. DeBakey, and I worked with them, and I got the DeBakey Surgical Award when I graduated. It was about the only real academic award. And that's how I got into the artificial heart. I went to Vietnam and I came back. I was lucky to get through that unscathed, because I was in a combat unit. I wasn't in the hospital. And I decided I would try to pursue the artificial heart as my research goal. I was a heart surgeon, of course, mainly, but I also had access to a laboratory, particularly with Dr. Cooley, which he became separated from Dr. DeBakey actually while I was in Vietnam. So I had the good fortune to have a laboratory that I could work in. A lot of it was just like a lot of things in life, it was just luck. And it was Dr. Cooley and Dr. DeBakey never got along well, and Cooley was a master surgeon. I mean, we did more heart surgery in St. Luke's Hospital in my era there than all of Western Europe, not just England, France, or Germany, all of them. So we did 4,000 cases in 1984. In all of Western Europe, they did about 2,000. So it was a great opportunity for me, and it was also a great opportunity to recognize the need for mechanical hearts and mechanical support, because we would lose patients every day. We would do 20 or 30 cases every day, and they were all high-risk cases, because that's why they were sent to Dr. Cooley. And I always felt like there was some mechanical way we could keep these patients alive. It would be very advantageous. I started to tell this story yesterday, but I decided not to, because it's a lay audience. But one of the things that impressed me the most was when I was a medical student. They had this young man that Dr. DeBakey operated on. I'd talked to him the night before, because the medical students worked up patients every night. And he was a young Italian, and he wanted to be an engineer. He was only 18, and Dr. DeBakey operated on him. He had a very bad valve disease, which was common in those days, particularly in Italy. He was an Italian, and his heart stopped in the recovery room, which happened then a lot. And they opened his chest. The resident did. I was still a medical student, but they had me massage his heart, because I was the youngest and the strongest. I was about 25 at that time, still in pretty good shape. As long as I massaged his heart, I could see he was awake. But I thought after that, I said, my hand could keep this boy alive. We should be able to make a pump that would do that. And I think that was the main point. I thought of this as a research goal to pursue. And of course, we have an artificial heart now, and there have been over 150,000 what we call left ventricular assist devices, because the whole heart doesn't fail. It's the left side that pumps to the body. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's not really left. It's posterior and anterior. But anyway, that's what we're stuck with, is the history. So I developed one of those pumps in the 80s. And one of the things that helped with that is, I think, the fact that I wasn't a science major. I looked at things more of a liberal arts, but one of the things I remember reading Jonathan Swift, that wrote Gulliver's Travels, but one of the things he said in one of his essays, he wrote a lot of essays, that if you have a good idea and you present it and people say, oh, that's a great idea, it's probably not a good idea. Somebody would have already done it. But if they say, well, that'll never work, it can't possibly work, just like airplanes and nearly everything else that was developed, you may have something, So in the early 80s, I decided that we really couldn't make a pulsal pump that would last. We made one that would last about 18 months, but, your heart beats 100,000 times every 24 hours. And it would just wear out. Every membrane that we had that would push the blood, it's amazing it would last about 18 months, but that meant that it couldn't replace the heart. It just a bridge to transplant. And the transplants, even though I've done more than anyone, they have limited value too, because most of those patients are dead by 10 years or so. And it has limited application because, as I think I said yesterday, you have to depend on someone else's misfortune to be able to help you. So I started working on an implantable pump, and I decided by the early 80s, probably 84, 85, that we couldn't make a pulsal that had to be continuous flow, non-pulsatile flow, because those pumps never wore out because they didn't have any wear points. They were just spinning. And we evolved them so that you didn't even have bearings. So, and I put in the first non-pulsal pump in 1986, actually. But it was just an assist device, and it was just for a short time. But from that, we've developed artificial hearts that I've had in patients. The assist devices for over 20 years without them wearing out. They don't wear out. They're just spinning. And we have now a total artificial heart that does that. And we put it in 7 patients. It's been very successful. So I guess that's the important thing I got out of my training and time with Dr. DeBakey is a goal, which I try to encourage all the students to try to have some goal to work for. Anyway, that's how that evolved.
Let's go back in your story just for a second. You majored in English and history.
Yeah.
What was your plan? What did you want to do? Did you always know you were going to be a surgeon, or were you going to do something else?
No, I didn't have any idea what I was going to. But I did know, both my mother and my father were teachers. And the bad thing about teaching in those days is there were no computer tests. Everything was done by hand. You had to grade by hand, and so they were tied up during the week, and they were also tied up during the weekend because they had to grade the papers. So the one thing I knew I wasn't going to be is a teacher like my father and my mother teaching 7th grade English. That was a tough role. But and she was very tough. My father was very mild, but my mother was sort of feared by everybody. At any rate, I was convinced I didn't want to do that, but I had no idea what else to do because everybody else in my family had been in education in some way, except my uncle who had started a business, but I didn't want to do that. So I thought I'd go to law school, and then my mother said I was raised largely by my mother. She said, you can do anything you want to do as long as you don't cheat, lie, or steal. And I said, I got to thinking, I was accepted to law school, University of Texas Law School. And I had the highest grade, I was told, by one of my undergraduate professors on the law school admissions test at the University of Texas. But I decided I'd go to medical school because I just philosophically decided that certainly in medicine you didn't have to certainly cheat, lie, or steal, but you also didn't have to compete with anybody. You were just competing with disease. And so that was appealing. But the problem I had then was I never had taken a pre-med course because I just philosophically came to this decision. And so I had to take all the pre-med courses in 1 year, which I don't know how I did that. I took 30 hours in the fall of 1962.
Oh my gosh!
In one, that semester.
I was fascinated by Dr. Frazier's story, mainly because of the path he took to rise to one of the most accomplished cardiovascular surgeons in the world. This next excerpt from our conversation captures my amazement. The accomplishments that you had with heart transplants and the artificial heart. I mean, you changed hundreds of thousands of lives. And this is from a history/English major who didn't know what he was going to do. That's pretty remarkable, Dr. Frazier.
Well, I don't know. It was just a lot of hard work, and believe me, it wasn't all success. There were a lot of failures. The success in life, as I've told many of my students, it doesn't depend on the things that you can do well, but it depends on how well you can do in something that you fail, if you can come back and correct what it was. And because the first 22 patients we put a device in, a left ventricular system, they all died. But the pump worked well. And, I realized that the patients had just reached a point in their illness, which happens, just like with metastatic cancer, heart failure does the same thing, in which you've got to intervene before they've reached that point to be able to benefit them. And as I said, a lot of good experiences come from bad experiences that you overcome, because that's the bad experiences where you find out the problems, and you have to deal with those.
Are you proud of what you've accomplished?
Well, I don't think proud is a good word. I'm pleased with the advances that we've made, but as I said, in this business, because we only dealt with patients with very serious illnesses, and a lot of what I accomplished delves from not the patients that did well, but the patients that didn't do well, and I think gave me encouragement and dedication to continue and try to make things better, as I said. And I'm pleased that I've been able to make these contributions. But I think a lot of it is, again, the educational background. Nobody believed that you could have a pump that didn't create a pulse. Nobody. So I was the only one that worked on a pump that flowed continuously. Now, the heart has to have a pulse because it has to empty and has to fill. But the liver doesn't. The blood just reaches there continuously in the capillaries. It's always moving continuously. And I looked you can see that in your thumb with the light and with the ultrasound. You can see the cells just moving continuously. And I'd done that. And I became convinced that the only meaningful assist devices and artificial hearts would have to be continuous flow. And of course, all the people that through the 80s and 90s told me it couldn't possibly be done, now they all think it was a great idea, that they really always had it themselves, but But I think that's one of the things I'm the most proud of, is not being, and I think one of the keys to that was I wasn't tied to science. I wasn't tied, but I could see the thing about being successful in something. You can't be successful or creative, let us say, looking backward. You can make good grades on tests. You can study, all the anatomy and biochemistry that was already done. But to be creative, you have to look at things a different way. And I think my education in the liberal arts probably helped that more than anything else, because I knew that we had to address these pumps in a different way. They had to be continuous flow. We couldn't make postal pumps, and we still haven't. All the pumps that are made, all that are used in the world are continuous flow pumps now. And of course, everybody thinks that it was a great idea now.
I bet they do.
And I'm glad I lived to see it done.
I thoroughly enjoyed my sit-down conversation with Dr. Frazier. Needless to say, I left his ranch inspired and amazed. But one of the best stories that Dr. Frazier shared wasn't captured while we were recording. The microphones were packed away, and we were saying our goodbyes when he told me about Tillman O'Brien. Tillman O'Brien was a football player at the University of Texas, and during one of the Longhorns' two-a-day practices, he accidentally ran into the leg of a new kicker who was recruited by Coach Darrell Royal. That kicker was Bud Frazier, and that career-ending leg injury changed everything, because Dr. Frazier went on to do what he did. As we walked through the ranch house, Dr. Frazier said, "That ended my football career, and I had to figure out what to do next." We both laughed, knowing how the story played out. Then Dr. Frazier said, "It was the best thing that ever happened to me." Thank you for listening to this episode of Bleed Purple, the podcast that tells the story of Tarleton State University through the stories of the people who bleed purple. This has been a two-part series highlighting Dr. Bud Frazier. I'm your host, Drew Myers. Bleed Purple.
Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Doug McLemore is the founder of McLemore Financial Group and a proud Tarleton graduate and supporter. The company specializes in providing personalized financial planning and investment strategies tailored just for you. Whether you're saving for retirement, planning for your child's education, or seeking to grow your wealth, their experienced advisors are here to guide you every step of the way. You can find them at 1529 West Lingleville Road in Stephenville, or on the web at mclemoregroup.com, or give them a call at 254-968-1020 to schedule your free consultation. McLemore Financial Group is your partner in financial success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through McLemore Financial Group, a DBA of Advisor Resource Council, a registered investment advisor. McLemore Financial Group and Advisor Resource Council are separate entities from LPL Financial.